Hey, this is Mark A. Altman,
And this is Ashley Miller. And we
and
are the Inglorious.
Treksperts. And Darren is still with our captain on the bridge of in Ticonderoga. He'll be joining us again next week. But right now, you got me and Ashley, and
Sorry.
we're so we're so excited to be here this Thanksgiving weekend because we thought it might be nice to give thanks to everything that Star Trek has given us. And I do want to say before we get into that, a big thank you to all our listeners and especially our Treksperts Plus subscribers who supported this podcast for the last 8 years. Obviously, we're so indebted to you for going along for the ride. These are conversations we've had for decades, but now we get to share them with tens of thousands of our new friends. So that's really exciting, and we're glad you're along for the ride. And I'm also gratified. We've been getting a lot of great feedback on our eighth season. A lot of the recent episodes clearly hit the spot, whether it be our Star Trek 3 or the Kelvin or our Starfleet Academy. So glad people seem to be responding to that. And a big thank you again to Kay Reindell last week for joining us for the Kelvin. Our episode on the Kelvin. It's a tough spot when you have a bunch of people who are not fans and of the Kelvin films, and to have her stand up for her love of those films. It's great, and obviously a lot of you out there agree with her because you're fans of those films, and more power to you, as they say.
Yeah.
Um, Ashley,
Sure.
we're before we get talking about giving thanks to Star Trek and all it's given us in our lives. Um, I want to remind fans that they can join us. They can see us in Columbus, Ohio next week. That's a good con, isn't it?
That's a great con. It's a ton of fun. There's always a ton of people. The food's great. We'll be there, obviously. It's like the OG stomping grounds for the Treksperts at GalaxyCon.
Yeah, yeah. That was my first GalaxyCon in Columbus with Darren, and then you joined the fun. And hopefully, it's one of their real signature events. It's a huge show, great guests, always a great time. So if you are anywhere in the Columbus, Ohio area or willing to travel, we'd love to see you at GalaxyCon Columbus. We'll be there, and hopefully you will be too. So check it out at galaxycon.com. If you can't make it next week, of course, we'll be doing a bunch of shows next year. And of course, the big one, 007, Star Trek Las Vegas in August. And we got some really exciting things planned, some amazing guests we already booked, but we haven't announced. And a very, very special stage reading. And that is really one of the highlights of the year for us, isn't it, Ashley?
Oh yeah, man. I mean, it's not only is it fun to see everybody up on stage and just being maniacs and pouring themselves like into these roles that they are literally getting on the day and practically cold reading. It's also like incredibly great for my ulcer to sort of sit backstage and pray that nothing goes wrong. So you know,
We've had amazing guests, everybody from Mary McDonald to Eddie James Olmos to Jonathan Frakes to Dan Fogler to Terry Farrell. I mean, just Andy Robinson. Just in our 2 years doing Plan 9 from Outer Space and War of the Worlds, and we're going to do something similarly fantastic this August. And if you are bummed that you missed War of the Worlds, we got Creations presenting a very bonus one this Martin Luther King Day weekend, War of the Worlds Redux, and this will be with the cast members of Supernatural. And if you want to check that out, I believe the tickets are on sale for that now at creationent.com. So you want to check that out if you want to make a trip to Vegas and see the War of the Worlds Redux. But a
the
lot of
funds are
exciting
present.
stuff.
Yeah.
All year long, and that comes back to I mean, we owe Star Trek so much in terms of our careers, in terms of our friendships, in terms of, um, just so much of our lives. And, you've told this story before, Ashley, but you got your first writing gig as a result of, I think it was talking about Star Trek and Babylon 5 on the precursor to the internet, the those old boards,
Oh, on Usenet, right?
on Usenet, right?
Yeah, man. That whole anybody who understands like the rec arts hierarchy or the alt trek hierarchy or whatever, man, it was very interesting. It was a very different time. It was the conversations were pretty much knockdown, drag out, except way smarter than they are today. Primarily because we were writing novels at each other about what we thought rather than trying to fit everything into pithy 40-word responses. And I got involved talking about Star Trek, and I had opinions. I would write little reviews of new Trek episodes, and one day I came across a thread where there was a big fight. Like my erstwhile writing partner Zach Stentz had written an article that was comparing the then the war between the Babylon 5 fans and Star Trek Deep Space Nine fans to Sunni and Shia conflict in the Middle East. It was really fascinating, right? It was a great article, and for the article, he had interviewed Robert Hewitt Wolf, who eventually became my first showrunner. And he attempted to interview J. Michael Straczynski, but Straczynski declined the interview, which Zach said right up front that he had tried to do. And, there were people beating up on him for going after Babylon 5. He hadn't, and beating up on him for being unbalanced. He wasn't. And Robert, who was one of the early adopters of the internet as a creator, was on there and was in the middle of this thing. And I inserted myself at some point and just went off. And I got an email. As you guys, I know you can't imagine me going off, but I got an email from Zach saying, "Ashley, you rule the universe." And I thought, well, here's a smart guy. I like him. I like the cut of his jib. And that was how I met Zach. That was how our writing partnership began. That was how we met Robert Wolf. That was what eventually created the opportunity for us to develop background materials for Andromeda and then go in and pitch the show. And, my love of Deep Space Nine specifically, really ended up working out for us because I went back and watched all of Robert's episodes and I broke down what made an episode work for him. I got into his head as a Star Trek writer and said, okay, here's how we're going to build these pitches. We pitched 7 episodes and he bought 5. So, clearly that worked. But Star Trek gave me my career, period. It gave me my writing partner. It gave me my first job. It gave me the keys to unlocking all that stuff. It's actually, it's fairly insane if you think about it.
Yeah. And it's funny because, your first feature script you sold back when, I was a partner in a production company. And, I had met Zach because Zach had interviewed me for Free Enterprise, for, I don't know if it was TV Guide or whoever he was writing for. It was some cool outlet. And, we became friendly. And that's how I met you, through Zach. So that's, I can't tell you all the eddies and currents that have brought all of us together because, of course, our mutual friend, who's often a guest on this podcast, Rob Burnett, we met at San Diego Comic-Con. And, he tells the story better than I do. But, he was working for a low-budget company, Full Moon, at the time. And they wanted to do a screening with by Universe Magazine at the time. And they said, I said, that sounds great. We'll do it. And they said, we got a guy here who's a big fan of yours. And I'm like, I don't want to talk to him. I'm not Robert Wolf. I don't like to talk to people. So he said, oh, no, but he's a really big fan. He gets on and he's just completely in total kiss-ass Rob mode. But we say the thing about kiss-ass Rob is it sounds like he's being obsequious, but it's totally authentic. It's 100%. Totally... And he's just going on, and he knew everything I'd written for Cinefantastique and everything. And of course, we became fast friends. And as a result of my group of friends who were huge fans, Star Trek fans, people like Melching and Kay and a bunch of it. And then we met Rob and his group of friends, and it became this huge kind of even larger group of the Algonquin Geek Table, as we now refer to them.
Right.
So, and it was all because of Star Trek, which was the Rosetta Stone for all of it. And as much as we love Star Wars and other things. It was really Star Trek, the thing that we keep coming back to. That is the, obviously we didn't do a Star Wars podcast, we did a Star Trek podcast, because it's a source of continued fascination that probably, I think for all of us, goes back to the making of Star Trek. That book, so many of us and so many friends of ours, you talk to David Goodman, or you talk to Andre Bormanis, or you talk to, virtually anyone who has worked on Star Trek or has worked in the industry, who toils in the genre world, where that book was sort of the book that said, hey, this is a job where you can write and create television like Star Trek, and it wasn't easy, but this is how you do it. Because it's, what was it, the tagline, the book, this is how, the book on how to love television, I think.
Right.
I have it right here. I mean, it's like, let's see. Yeah, the book on how to write for TV. The book on how to write for TV. This is it. This is really the Bible. I mean, this was like, this was what started us, I think, all. I mean, you're a little younger, but sure. I mean, that was a key book for you.
Yeah, it absolutely was. I feel like my brother bought that, and then I picked it up off his shelf, and I read it, and I was totally fascinated by it. I mean, honestly, the thing that stands out to me the most, other than the different designs of the Enterprise, are the salt shakers. Mm-hmm. The whole thing about the salt shakers is props, and that basically teaches you everything you need to know about how to be a smart producer in Hollywood. But I'll just interject, just going back to something you said about how the thing that keeps bringing us all back together and kind of in one ring to bind them all, and it's Star Trek. If you think about that time in our lives, Star Trek, I mean, as important it is as it has always been to so many of us, at that point in time, it was also culturally ascendant. Mm-hmm. And it was culturally dominant in a way that Star Wars simply was not. Right? Like Star Wars had, I mean, other than the special editions, which were kind of reviled for really excellent reasons, it had kind of disappeared. We were waiting for more. We wanted more, but Star Trek: The Next Generation had come out. It was a huge success, and Deep Space Nine had come out, and it wasn't as much of a success commercially, but still, I mean, Star Trek was a monster. It was a juggernaut. And you couldn't have a conversation about science fiction without talking about Star Trek. You could not talk about Babylon 5 really without talking about Star Trek. J. Michael Straczynski certainly could not talk about Babylon 5 without talking about Star Trek, even though you wished that he just fucking would stop. So it's no wonder to me that's the glue, right? That's the thing that that puts the table together. And I still regret missing those days in the 90s. I regret being the last man to the table, but I'm happy that I found a spot there.
But it's sort of like we still had Stan, because when Jedi ended, it's sort of like Star Wars ended. There was a huge gap before the prequels, or even rumors of the prequels, and it was kind of like after Jedi, it felt like kind of over Star Wars, whereas Star Trek, even because of syndication and because of then later with Next Generation, later and movies continuing, it felt like Star Trek never ended. It was so people, I don't think, stopped. There was never a point in which people stopped caring or being invested in Star Trek. Yeah, I mean, there's that long gap between the end of Enterprise and before anything happens with the franchise again. But I think even during that time, people still talked about Star Trek. People still cared about Star Trek. People were still invested in Star Trek, and it's what we talk about. It's like you appreciate episodes on different levels. One way as a kid, and then maybe a different way as you get older. And your favorite episodes change as a result of that. Maybe something that was more frivolous and silly and fun or action-packed you liked when you were younger, and then maybe something more thoughtful and cerebral you like more when you're older. I still don't love Metamorphosis the way other people do, but that's me.
They're all same.
Yeah. But it's so interesting because I wonder, it's like, when did Star Trek sort of like become this important part of my life? And I go back and I look at my little autograph book from 5th grade when I graduated elementary school, and like all the people were making like Star Trek jokes in my autograph book. So it was like, clearly I was obsessed with Star Trek going back to elementary school. And I know Darren is fortunate. He remembers that it was the animated series that triggered his love of Star Trek. I don't remember specifically that moment when Star Trek came into my life. But do you remember? I mean, I know your brother was a huge fan, obviously, but when you sort of got hooked?
No, I mean, I don't. I mean, this sounds ridiculous, but I cannot remember what it would be like to not have Star Trek in some
Mm-hmm.
form or another in my life. Like it was just it was a constant. It was a thing that was there. It was on every day. Um,
Yeah.
and I think I was blessed by the fact that my older brother was so into it and that his friends were into it, because I was surrounded by conversations about Star Trek. I was, my brother was, the kind of fan who he made costumes,
Yeah.
right? He made tribbles. He built the model sets. He actually made the goddamn communicators work because he's an evil genius. So I was, as a tiny boy, I was blessed to be surrounded by a fan community, completely unintentionally, but surrounded by a fan community that was a very interactive community. That was a
Yeah.
very, it was, it wasn't just, hey, I like to watch the show every day at 5. It's like, no, actually, we're gonna like make some goddamn shirts, and we're gonna shoot some tasers, and we're gonna go outside, and we're gonna pretend to be Kirk and Spock and McCoy and Scotty, and I'm gonna be the
Yeah.
red shirt behind a rock.
That's interesting because I had the opposite experience growing up in a sports family because my father was a huge, we'd rent New York Rangers season tickets and New York Knicks season tickets, and was a huge sport, as was my brother. Um, but it's funny because my dad, I remember, always loved when I was, if Piece of the Action was on, he would watch it, and I just remember every time Who Moans for Adonias would come on the TV in the giant hand, and my brother would look and he would go, "Oh, not this one again." and, but it's just it was just, but there was a group of people that I knew, at that time, who were all really into Star Trek. And it was funny because as a kid, we started this thing. I started a fanzine called Galactic Journal, and we had the Galactic Club of Science Fiction. And, I met like incredible people through that because we had members like all around the world.
Oh
And,
wow.
and then a very good friend of mine, who from Las Vegas, I met because we were going to make a Star Trek esque Super 8 movie and had an ad up in the library. And he answered to do the special effects, and that was my friend Steven Simak, who I've
Love
known
it.
since I'm a kid. Um, but it was all as a result of kind of Star Trek, and then the I guess the ultimate uh, Star Trek was at the Telluride Film Festival. I met my wife largely because of Star Trek, because I was wearing a Free Enterprise hat. Only because I'd been wearing a 6 Feet Under hat the whole weekend, and everybody kept saying, "Oh, do you work on 6 Feet Under?" And I'm like, "No, I don't work on 6 Feet Under." And I got so sick of it, I finally put on the Free Enterprise hat, which I was self conscious about because I didn't want to wear a hat for my own movie, but it was the only other hat I
Right.
had. So I wear it, and then like I'm getting into an elevator, and my one day wife would said to me, she said, "Oh, did you work on Free Enterprise? I love that movie." And then she said, "Wait, you're Mark Hallman." and I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, and she said, "Yeah, I watched all the bonus materials on the DVD." And it's like, it's so funny. So I mean, I have really Star Trek to thank for my family and for my wonderful wife and family because of making that movie, which you know I've talked about it in nauseum, and I don't want to dwell on it, but obviously making my first feature film with Bill Shatner. I mean,
Yeah.
I still to this day, it's a bizarre thing that this guy who I kind of worshipped growing up and still did, to make a movie with him and then have that be such an incredible experience and continue to be a part of my life even now, and a wonderful part at that. It's just it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary.
Well,
But
look, I mean, you technically, like, not technically, you actually, you were the first person in Hollywood who ever wrote me a check. Um, then the
and it didn't
reason why
bounce. That's good.
it didn't bounce, it cleared. That was the crazy thing. I bought a
Yeah.
laptop with it, my first laptop.
Yeah.
And then, when Zach and I wrote Cody Banks, we got on to Cody Banks through Rob Burnett.
Yep.
And Rob got to where he was through Free Enterprise, through meeting you, through Star Trek.
Yeah.
Just
I mean,
it's
that's the
inescapable.
thing. It's like it's not even Kevin Bacon, because it's less than 6 degrees. But we all have this, this incredible. It is like the Guardian. I keep saying Eddie's and Currents, but that we always said that working in Hollywood is kind of like the Devil's Tower and Close Encounters. That some people see the signal and make their mashed potato mountains, but not everybody makes it out to the tower. And it's like for all of us that like came out to the tower, and of those people, there are a bunch of people who didn't have the success that they hoped they would have.
Yeah.
And then there are those of us who were lucky enough, luck or happenstance or hard work or persistence, to have had the chance to do what we love. And I don't think any of us take that for granted because it's a really remarkable thing.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's funny. I just did an interview with the Keeping Up with the Kardashians podcast. I normally don't do these things, but they caught me on a good day, and they were very nice guys. And I also am promoting my new, the Christmas documentary. So
Yeah.
all those things came together. I'm like, okay, I'll talk to these guys. They sound cool. What the heck. And it was interesting because one, when you listen to it, you can hear how freaking tired I am because they record on Saturday mornings. So I was like, I'm talking like this because I just woke up and I'm exhausted, and I should have made it later. But it brought back all these memories for me of when I was in college, and I told the story of how I was, editor of the school paper, and very interested in this new show, Star Trek: The Next Generation, and got this press release where it was like 60 ways to cover the new Star Trek series, and it had all these different suggestions, and then like number 37 was do a set visit. And I'm like, well, that sounds like fun. That sounds interesting. And I called and I went, and went to the set of Star Trek Next Generation with my Steven and my college roommate Mitch, who was my photographer. I don't know if he'd ever taken a picture in his life, but I said he was my photographer. And we, interviewed the entire cast of Star Trek. It's where I met John Frakes for the first time, and the whole cast, and was on the set of Too Short a Season. And the only ones that had aired were Farpoint and Naked Now. But what an extraordinary time to be on the set of, to be there at the beginning of this. I mean, I couldn't be there. Obviously, I was too young to be at the have anything to do with the original series.
Right.
But to be there at the beginning of TNG, and then to follow that all the way through, because I was there covering it for many, many years, and of course there for the finale, for All Good Things, and to be there at the beginning and be there at the end. And it's always funny because Brandon always says you were such an important part of Star Trek, and I'm like, I don't get residuals. I said no, I was a fly on the wall. I was not a part of I was not a part of Star Trek. It's like, I appreciate you saying that, but
Brandon's not wrong. I mean, because your place in the machine was, you were probably the most important, for lack of a better term, thought leader, for the general fandom. Your, season reviews, Cinefantastic. They were must reads. I didn't always agree with you, but what I always appreciated.
I don't agree with me. I read some of those.
I know you go back and kind of look at some reviews. What was I smoking? But I mean, I always appreciated the depth of thought that you brought to it. And it wasn't a, hey, I'm a knee-jerk fanboy response. And it wasn't a, hey, I'm too good for this, but I'm reviewing it anyway response. It was an honest, critical response that came from a place of love, and a very intelligent one. And because of that, I think it really helped to shape opinions. It's why I think this guy's got so uptight and out of sight occasionally. When, the whole, like, the infamous, kicking us when we're down.
Critical, yeah.
But,
the thing that was so cool about that was it was a time when Star Trek was, like, first run syndication was considered the ghetto, right? And there was no respect whatsoever. I mean, other than the mainstream press maybe covering Farpoint and giving it some good reviews, they didn't care. So, like, I got to cover it, and and I joke, and this is true. This was a time where I was there so much. Publicists would say, "Hey, I got to go back to the office, so you just stay. Everyone knows you. Just go and do whatever you need to do, and call me if there's any problems." And like she would just leave me there on set, and I could just go up to people and talk to whoever I wanted, hang out on set. And I mean, I felt like I was the Cameron Crowe of Star Trek. You know, the way he covered. I was a little older, but the way he covered rock and roll, I was covering Star Trek because I had that kind
Right.
of relationship. That would never happen now.
Right.
Information is too controlled. There are too many outlets. No one gets that kind of access. Nobody could dream of getting that. Even Vanity Fair, it's still like you're being handled by publicists, and you're not just getting to talk to whoever you want. I mean, I was so lucky. It was just the perfect timing, the convergence of events, and that this thing Cinefantastic existed, and that Fred, also made published these great issues and cared so much, because I remember it was very frustrating. He'd be like, "Oh, I got the article, it's being laid out, it's great, but now I need you to write the captions," and he'd fax me all the photos so I could read. I'm like, oh. And I hated writing captions. He wanted new information that wasn't in the article in the captions, and like for me, it was kind of annoying, but that's
Mm-hmm.
how much he cared about it. And those issues were extraordinary, and
One of
I
my
was so
favorites.
glad to be a part of that unique time where the only way you could get this kind of information about Star Trek was to buy the magazines, buy magazines. There weren't even like DVDs or anything like that. So, or if there
Man,
were, it was so slight in terms of their coverage.
it just occurred to me, like, I have all of those. Like, I kept them all. What I really need to do is I need to go grab all of them and then bring them with me to like a con sometime and just have you sign them. Then put them on eBay. No,
Yeah,
or just have you sign them.
you couldn't afford the extra luggage fee to take those all.
Probably
They were so
not. No.
heavy. They were so heavy. But I think what's so great is in the way that I worked on Free Enterprise. Your first show was Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda. So even
Yeah.
though Gene Roddenberry had passed, and even though it's kind of based on a napkin that he threw out one day and decided, but still, it's still Gene Roddenberry. It's
Yeah.
still from the Great Bird of the Galaxy. So that's kind of remarkable. And then you had these mentors
Mm-hmm.
that sort of were teaching, showing you the ropes. And I think mentorship is so important. It's something that we've all said about what we thought Starfleet Academy should be, and it's something that I came very close to actually selling, which I don't talk about much, but and then ultimately paved the way for my show Pandora. But the idea of Starfleet Academy as the paper chase, and that it's about these teachers that inspire and change our lives. And you had that. I mean, we've all had that in our careers, but you had that with directors, and obviously with Robert Hewitt Wolf, but also people you worked with on Andromeda that showed you the ropes.
Oh yeah, for sure, man. Look, Andromeda was my film school. I did not clock 1 credit hour of film studies at all, anywhere, at any time. No screenwriting classes, none of that shit. So all of my background was just what I brought myself and kind of through other experiences. But learning about how to make television, learning about how to make a film, all came from Andromeda, where we had zero money. The money that we did have went to the star. We were locked down on sets. We had 7-day shoots when God was good. Mainly we had 6-day shoots. We occasionally had a second unit day every once in a blue moon if we were really good, God willing, and the creek don't rise. Um, and I was fortunate to work for Robert Wolf, who came up, under, Ira Bear and Michael Piller, and within that lineage. He, although he did a thing that I know was rare in the Star Trek world, other than with Ira, which is that we got to go to set. We got to watch our dailies and give notes on cuts. We were invited to talk to the actors and form those professional relationships and solve problems and do all of those things, man. It was really quite extraordinary, and it was 3 solid years of that, 22 episodes a year. The directors that we had, I mean, you talk about like directors in TV being traffic cops, and when you've got 6 days, holy crap. And
Mm-hmm.
you've got you're basically doing $3 million of ambition on $1 million per episode. You got to be a hell of a cop. And there are things you just learn. I mean, I had to, and this was again sort of using things applying previously acquired knowledge and capability. But I figured out how the hell to be a line producer on Andromeda, because one day I got so mad that somebody told me that my script was too expensive that I went back and I looked at all of the budgets, and I looked at all of the cost reports. I did a whole parametric analysis, and I backed out our line producers' numbers for the pattern budget on everything. I backed it out, and I basically went through. I did a rewrite on a script. And when I gave it to Robert, his eyes just went wide, and he sent it up to Vancouver, and the directing producer's eyes, he just apparently said, "Oh my God, what the hell happened here?" Showed it to the line producer, whose head exploded, because I had basically provided the entire financial picture. But it allowed me to go through and then make changes that worked with budget. And that has been invaluable, thinking about, television as a process. All of that came from that experience on Andromeda that I'm so thankful for. And creatively, it got to be a thing that spoke to me as a Star Trek fan, as a Gene Roddenberry fan, as somebody who understood how Deep Space Nine worked, right? And Robert's view of Deep Space Nine. And I got to work with some really incredible people, like Alan Eastman, who was our directing producer on that show, directing EP. He had directed a couple of episodes of Voyager and Deep Space Nine. Bookmark that for a second. But he directed, my very first episode of television, which was, strangely enough, the first episode of Andromeda that was actually shot. The script where I backed out the line producer's pattern budget. I remember I remember him saying about that script, he read it, and he said, "That script had the wildest left turn I've ever read, man." And I have been chasing that note, chasing, the idea of where's my wild ass left turn, in Act 4 for, 25 years or more, just trying to find that. That was the thing.
And it's worth saying, I just want to say something you said about you were the first up, but not the first episode to air. Often on TV shows, if you have a series order and aren't doing a pilot, you don't shoot your premiere episode first because you want to give the crew and the cast a chance to get up to speed. So you do a later episode first, and then you shoot the premiere episode, because theoretically it's going to be better. Because usually the first couple of days or first week of filming is never your best.
Yeah, 100%. And that was exactly why that episode was shot. It was technically a bottle show, but it was a big space battle show. But it had all of our crew together doing nothing but being on those sets and kind of being cranky and under pressure. Alan directed that. Alan, it's funny, he directed on Deep Space Nine. He directed Honor Among Thieves, which is the first credit, the first writing credit for my good friend Phil Kim, who was a PA on that show. And Phil, he was the person who, when I went out to LA, without having a career yet, who took me out to the sets and took me on a tour and introduced me to Ira and all this other stuff. And that was his first writing credit. And it was also, a really great episode. He directed Prey for Voyager and Relativity. And, he passed, I want to say about a week and a half ago. Very sad, but man, that guy, I cannot overstate how much you can learn from somebody who is just a very gifted workhorse, right? Yeah. Somebody who really understands process, but also appreciates art. When you can combine those two in a person, and then give them the personality of somebody who's willing to say, hey, this is when I read this is what I got from it, and this is what this is what I think we can do with it, or this is how you can help me do my job better.
Yeah, yeah.
right? I mean, that's just incredible. So I'm so sad to see him go. I am so glad that he was around.
Yeah. We meet so many amazing people that help us on our journey, the good ones. We said this before, we stand on the shoulders of giants. I know that like, for, on a show I did for TNT called Agent X, these could not have been two more different directors. One was a guy named Felix Alcala who did a lot of Galactica, and
Hmm.
he would go around. He's such an interesting dude. He would go around and basically drive around in a like Winnebago, like Walter White, and stay in the Winnebago. When he was going on production, he would come to L.A. in his Winnebago. He'd park his Winnebago. He'd go to set, and he shot like the wind. And he was like, he did not fuck around. He was such a great guy, and I think sometimes his blunt honesty would rub people the wrong way. And then, but I loved him, and I thought he was great. I really wanted to work with him again, and we almost did on something. And then it was a guy, Rod Holcomb, who passed away a couple years ago. Rod was remarkable because he was a guy who had worked on. He had done the first Bigfoot episode of $6 Million Man, and had
Nice.
done a bunch of episodes of the original Battlestar Galactica. So he went way back, and to have the opportunity, and he was more of that kind of journeyman veteran director. He'd been head of the DGA, but he'd been doing TV for decades. But he made it look effortless, and just to sit there with him in Video Village and have a chance to sort of pick his brain about how he did things. And I mean, I remember our lead, Jeff Hebner, turned into a little boy when I said, Jeff, Rod directed Bigfoot and $6 Million Man. And he's like, he thought I was kidding. He's like, oh, yeah, sure. And Rod goes, yeah, I did. And he goes, no way. And he comes running over all. And we're
That's
all, and
awesome.
we're all sitting around Video Village, like talking about, $6 Million Man. It's like, that's a show I watched as a kid. And it was, it's so great because we have, at least our generation has these touch tones because we all grew up with kind of the same media. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with the millennials and Z who grew up in the post network TV era with streaming, where they don't have any of the same touchstones because they were all watching stuff and having different experiences, and they don't have that kind of, there was no cultural zeitgeist the way
Right.
that, the MASH finale was in the cultural zeitgeist, or Roots was in the cultural zeitgeist, or even you could argue the Next Generation's premiere, you know?
100%. Or the Next Generation finale. That was a big deal, dude.
Yeah. Yeah. Or waiting that summer for Best of Both Worlds Part 2. So
I
it's
mean, the
really,
closest they probably have is like Avengers Endgame.
yeah,
That's
right. It was
that's
the
it.
Marvel movies. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And absolutely. So that's, I mean, I guess in a way, Wicked for Good is turning out to be that. I mean, there seems to be, a huge amount of interest. I mean, it's doing phenomenally well. Good, but I'm glad. I'm not a fan of those movies because I don't like musicals, but I'm so glad that people are, flying out to the theaters to go see it. I mean, it's a great thing for our industry, and
Yep.
obviously the play is wonderful. So, it's all good. Um, but yeah, we meet these people along the way that are just um, incredible. And you said, you didn't go to film school. I was the same way. I didn't go to film school. Writing about Star Trek and other movies and TV shows was my film school. People have asked, like, where'd you learn to do? Like, when I produced my first movie, Free Enterprise, like, how did you know to do that? And it was just because, for 10 years or so, I had been watching and interviewing. And it got to the point, where I'm sitting interviewing Michael Piller for 3 hours. I'm not just asking stuff for the magazine. I'm asking questions for myself. How do you run a writer's room? How do you do it? Why, So I just through osmosis, I was learning so much. So by the time I was running my own shows, I mean, I owe those people
Yes.
basically. They were my film school, and I got paid to go to Star Trek Film School, which I'm always just so grateful for. I think that's part of why when people say, "Oh, what's your second favorite show next to the second favorite Star Trek next to the original series," which will always be my number one, is it Next Gen or Deep Space Nine? And I often can't decide because my Next Generation experience is so enveloped in all of those memories of being
Yep.
a part and on the set and watching that show evolve. I was on Deep Space Nine a ton too, but it didn't. It does. By then, it was work. It didn't
Right.
have the same. You know, I
It didn't
done
have
it
the
for
same
next
magic.
gen. It didn't have the same magic. Like I love being there, and those sets were extraordinary. And you know, that was the one or two times I ever got to talk to Avery. You know, which was rare for anybody. Um, and obviously, it's remarkable that I first met like people like Terry and Nana and stuff back then, and now we're pretty good friends with them.
Yeah.
But um, but yeah, but Deep Space Nine didn't. But to me, it was kind of it's just such a phenomenal show, and it's really when I look at the Pluto test, it's like when I'm going through Pluto, and there's this original the Star Trek Next Gen channel, and there's the Deep Space Nine channel, and there's the Voyager channel, and there had been the Star Trek movie channel, now it's the James Bond channel again. It's like take this James Bond out of the mix. It's like what channel do I find myself watching the most? It's usually Deep Space Nine, unless TOS is on the Next Gen channel. It's like
Right.
if I have to choose between those three, and it seems like Enterprise is on their sci-fi one a lot, but I generally find myself migrating to the Deep Space Nine channel the most, unless it's Meridian or Move Along Home.
Yeah, like one of the few, like, okay, yeah, that was a misfire.
Yeah, yeah, and then of course it's interesting because you went from Andromeda and you worked on Fringe, and that was a show that had a lot of Star Trek connections. Obviously, Leonard was on it. That must have been a special.
Oh yeah, you know what? It's like I was so excited because I think that his first actual appearance on the show was in my episode Momentum Deferred, and
Mm-hmm.
like maybe he appeared in the finale of the season, but it doesn't matter because the important thing is I got Leonard Nimoy to say physics is a bitch. I
That's
got Leonard
amazing.
Nimoy to say bitch on
Yeah,
TV. Are you
yeah,
kidding
yeah,
me? That
yeah,
one's going
yeah,
right on my wall. In fact, it is on my
yeah.
wall. It's fantastic. But yeah, man, there was a lot of Trek on Fringe. I mean, for good or ill. I mean, it was created. I mean, JJ obviously it was partly created by him, um, and it was Bob and Alex, and then Akiva. I mean, all those guys eventually, went on to be involved in Star Trek in one way or another, in big ways and in small ways. I became involved in Star Trek very specifically through Bob until that ended.
Yeah.
There was just a lot there, and obviously there was a lot of influence on Fringe through Star Trek.
Did you? Sorry.
Sure.
When you were on Thor, did you know what a huge fan Feige was of Star Trek at the time?
I had no clue. I had no clue. If I had known, we would have geeked out. But I had no idea that he was such a Star Trek fan.
Yeah.
Um, it's amazing. Like there are so many Star Trek fans. Like so when I was working on Black Sails, John Steinberg, who was the creator showrunner of that show, massive Star Trek fan, massive Star Trek fan, and everything in life comes back to Star Trek too. So when we were plotting out the fourth season of Black Sails, and he brought me in to help him figure out how to land that ship.
Mm-hmm.
Our touchstone, our guide was Star Trek 2. When in doubt, is it the Matara Nebula? Yeah, it's totally the Matara Nebula. It's like that's what we're
That's
doing
funny.
here.
That's
So it's Star Trek's influence is everywhere. It's everywhere.
I was thinking a lot recently about how the Star Trek fans that grew up on TOS are very different than the Star Trek fans who grew up on the TOS movies. It's like the ones who grew up on the TOS movies think Scotty is a comedic character, and because I was thinking about this after we did our Kelvin episode, and
Hmm.
how people who grew up on the TOS movies are more likely to like the Kelvin movies because it reflects sort of the tropes of those movies as opposed to TOS the series, which was a very different show than the movies.
Yes.
And there are a lot of people I know that kind of Khan was their gateway drug into Star Trek, and then eventually they went and discovered TOS and liked it. But their understanding or appreciation of Star Trek is very different from those of us who grew up watching the original series.
I mean, I would argue that Star Trek the Motion Picture and Star Trek 2 were probably the most like OG TV Star Trek in
Yeah.
terms of where the focus was. And, you know, a lot of the things now, I mean, we've had this conversation before about how, you know, one of the many sins of Star Trek 3 was actually one of its virtues at the time, which was Harv Bennett's, you know, pushing material out, you know, past the big three, you know,
Yeah.
and kind of giving everybody their page, Mission Impossible style, and how that infected that movie series. And you know, it just for good or ill in 4, 5, and 6.
The
But
funny thing is, oh, sorry.
I was just
I
gonna say, it
was just
just
good.
became the template for Next Generation. But go ahead. Yeah,
But servicing the ensemble in 3 and 4 are like 3. It's done well, giving everybody something to do and stealing the Enterprise, you know, and also the fact that Kirk is not exploiting, but calling on their loyalty to go save Spock. Like that's all good. Star Trek 4, obviously the ensemble works marvelously, but it doesn't mean that every movie needs to give I mean, that's where, certainly a problem with 5 is like, oh, her does the fan dance and Scotty bumps his head on the beam. And it's like, it's like, that was a movie about the big three. It was
that's
not,
right.
you did not need to service the other characters. And in a
That's right.
way, he was trying to service the other characters because he knew, like, they had all this antipathy towards him. So I think he was trying to spread the wealth around to say, hey, I'm going to give everybody a moment. And then, Star Trek 6 kind of makes the same mistake of like trying to spread it around and gives them that ridiculous scene where they're translating Klingon on the bridge, and I just
Yeah, it kind of gives
I,
people some side quests that they don't need.
yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And then of course you run your own show for Netflix, DOTA Dragon's Blood, and what surprised you most as a showrunner, that even as a co-EP and as the quote unquote hired help, what before, what surprised you the most about these new responsibilities?
How little I know.
Hmm.
Um, you know how unprepared I think we are anytime we take command of anything. And you know, to a certain extent, I think dealing with that does come back to Captain Kirk. What would Captain Kirk do? You know,
Right.
the whole point of Star Trek is it's the unknown, man. You are by definition not prepared for the thing that you're going to encounter, and you just have to rely on your own resourcefulness, what you know about your ship and what it can do, what you know about your crew and what it can do. You know, articulate a clear vision for what happens next.
You
Trust
know,
people to do their job.
Ashley, it's so funny. I just thought of something. The first thing, certainly, I think we both learned as showrunners, but you learned the showrunners training program, or anyone worth their salt learns. The only wrong decision is no decision, right?
That is
That you
right.
have to be decisive, and I think that's a reason why I am so, I so dislike the way they write Pike in Strange New Worlds.
Yes, I
That
completely
he
agree.
is constantly relying on other people, to weigh in and to make these decisions. Whereas I think we are of the school, you need to make it. You need to take all the facts and make a decision and stand by it.
That's right. It's like, yeah, that. I think that's exactly right. That's exactly, you know, what's kind of wrong with Pike. And it represents, I think, learning all the wrong lessons about Star Trek and how it works. It's somebody attempting to interpret it without really understanding the mechanism of why
Yeah.
a character like that works. But it's true. I mean, you know, Star Trek teaches us that sometimes, you know, you've just got to make the big decision, and ultimately, that the responsibility for the big decision rests on your shoulders. You just have to be wise enough to trust your people to get things done, and to know the appropriate time to raise a hand. I mean, literally, when you know, when I started the actual production on Dota, I told, you know, everybody, like including, like, you know, my animators out in Korea. I said, look, I don't know everything. I know less right now than I do know, right? I mean, there's just so much I don't know about how to make animation. I said, I do know how to tell a story. I do know how to keep things organized. Um, and I am going to throw things out there. I am going to make decisions. And if I make a decision that is stupid, it is your job to say, hey, boss, that's stupid. Let's reconsider. But
Yeah.
if you don't tell me that, A, I won't learn, and B, you better go through with my stupid idea.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
It's
so.
like, yeah.
That's absolutely. You know, it's interesting because it's like, how do you inspire people to follow you in leadership? I mean, when I was doing my show for the CW, Pandora, which is a sci-fi show that I had 2 nickels to make, you know, so I was trying to do Star Trek with 12 cents. I mean, less than
Hmm.
probably Babylon 5 had in the 90s. Um, you know, I remember when I first got there, and there was a lot of pushback on, you know, we don't have the money, we don't have the money, and it was like, and I kept, you know, sort of doing what you do. It's like, well, we're going to find the money, but at one point, I remember I was just upset about the art direction and the set deck, and I got the director and the DP, and we went out to IKEA, and I ended up spending like $2,000 my own money to buy a bunch of stuff. And when we walked on the set with these huge bags of IKEA, and everyone's looking, and they saw how much we cared about the show, that I would spend my own money, and that, you know, I wasn't going to accept it. It all changed. And everybody's like, "What can we do? How can we help?" And, you know, let's see, we'll find the money, and we'll do this, and it just changed the whole dynamic. And I think this, you know, it's like people want to see, you know, that you're invested, that you care, that you're passionate, and because particularly when you film, like we were filming in Europe, you know, a lot of people go there because it's less money, and so they don't care, and they treat the crews really bad. They just are, you know, phoning it in to do these cheesy things. And like, as soon as they knew that like we actually were really invested in what we were doing, and that we valued them and we valued their abilities, and that we would, you know, call on them, you know, it all changed. And was, you know, couldn't have been a better experience. And
Well,
it just.
it all kind of comes down to, look, I don't think Star Trek Generations is anybody's favorite Star Trek movie. But there is a really great moment where Kirk says to Picard, "It sounds like the odds are against us and the situation is grim. Sounds like fun." I mean, that I think actually very effectively expresses the attitude. It expresses the vibe that we take from Star Trek and that we apply. I mean, I think I was as shaped as a leader, as a thinker, as a decision maker by Captain Kirk as by anybody. You know, with
Yeah.
maybe a touch of Captain Sisko's swagger. You know, I
Yeah.
learned the value of, you know, destroying
But I
planets.
can live with it.
I can live with it.
But I absolutely. I mean, I think that's why I made a movie about, you know, which basically extolled the genius of Bill Shatner and Captain Kirk, because Rob and I made that movie because Kirk was so influential to me in terms of leadership, in terms of being the captain. You know, I mean, Rob always says, "Be the captain of your own enterprise." That's kind of his mantra, right? And
Right.
it's like, you know, and he's right. And but you know, I think we all took, you know, these leadership lessons from uh, Captain Captain Kirk, and you know, with a little, you know, later Picard, but a little, you know, and a little more Cisco probably, because Cisco's a lot more like Kirk than he is
Yeah.
like Picard. And I don't think you ever surrendered, and I've never surrendered.
No.
So,
No.
but yeah, it's interesting because, you know, generally things in pop culture these days are so ephemeral. Even the biggest shows, Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad, Soprano, you know, people still love them, but they're not something people talk about every day. Whereas Star Trek's so unique because, you know, this has been something in our lives since we're very young. It hasn't gone away. For 8 years we've been talking about this stupid show on this goddamn podcast, and are likely to for, you know, the foreseeable future. So it's I find it fascinating.
Hmm.
You know, I really do. I don't know if I quite have wrapped my head around why it continues to, you know, we find it so compelling. I mean, there are only 79 episodes of the original series, and as they said on Futurama, about a third of them good ones. No, I think it's more than that. To be honest, you know, Next Generation, that is, you know, and of course, even with the movies, it's like they're, you know, really, if you look at it, I know some people are gonna hate hearing this. There are probably more bad episodes of Star Trek at this point than there are good episodes. Um,
Oh yeah.
and but yet it's something that we can't quit you, Star Trek.
Right. Well, you know, the funny thing is that for as much as we say that there's a whole lot of Star Trek, or that there's way more science fiction, or even just expand the definition, genre television now than there has been in the past, right? There's a lot of it. But there is an unbelievably huge number of cop shows, of doctor shows, of lawyer shows, of soap operas, of you name it. There's just so much of it out there. Very little of it, right, occupies such a central place in the heads of the fans who kind of made it what it was. Star Trek, I think, is unique and immortal simply because for as much of there is of it, there's not a lot. Right? It's in the vast scheme of things, there's just not a lot. That market is not fragmented in the way that that other shows are fragmented. The Sopranos is an amazing show. The Wire is an amazing show. There are a lot of fucking crime shows, right? It's a very special, unique thing, and I think it also came along at exactly the right time. It came along at a time when the idea of fandom was truly born, right? When the technology to communicate, to gather, to kind of to propagate like what we were doing, like video. My God, even just the ability to videotape things happening at a convention, right? And all of that technology got democratized. Like, fandom as a global communal experience was born with Star Trek. And because of the way that Star Trek evolved and that Star Trek lived on, it managed, to cross multiple generations. And because of that, I think, look, as much as we might want to complain about some of the more recent entries in the Star Trek franchise, accepting like that there are some really good new entries in the franchise, I don't know that those things can really damage the place that Star Trek has in the culture. I think Star Trek is bigger than any one show because it just changes you. When you become a fan of it, it changes you in ways that I think that other shows do not.
And it's funny because we did the show about us because we're the hosts, right? But you could take 50 other people that you've heard on the show or haven't heard on the show who could have a very similar conversation about how Star Trek has done so much in their lives, and brought them together with such interesting people. And of course, it's not only, our good friends that we know, but we met so many of you at the conventions and heard your stories and these incredible things that have happened, whether it be during the pandemic or things, why the podcast means so much to you, or just your connection with Star Trek. That's been fascinating as well, and it's something we're going to continue to explore throughout the 60th, as we explore the emotional component of what Star Trek means to people, and not just the episodes, and not.
What I'd love to see. I would love it if everybody out there in listener land, if you are so moved, would write us an email or post on Discord or something, anything that gets to what we're talking about in this episode, how Star Trek shaped you, what it meant to you growing up, how it made you what you were, and what part of your personal, emotional, intellectual, physical success you attribute to that. Something that these personal stories about what it means. Because I think it would be, if this is indeed Life from Lifelessness, we must visit this place again. I think it might be fun to kind of come back and look at the responses that we get, because I suspect we'll probably get some.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you send it to trekspertsplus@gmail.com, either you can write it or you can send us a video. If it's a video, we might use it on a future show. If it's written, we might read it on a future show. So do send that to us, trekspertsplus@gmail.com, because we will be spending the rest of the year sort of talking about what Star Trek means to everyone. And I think because we're still trying to wrap our own heads around why it resonates so much for so many people, what it is about Star Trek that we all love, and it has brought so many of us together into this community that is called fandom. Ashley, this has been terrific. I really enjoyed talking about all this. I'm sure we could go on for another hour, but we We're not, but I'm sure it like much like in the Matera Nebula, the Genesis planet, we will revisit this place again. So, on behalf of Ashley and myself, we want to say you can listen to podcasts, Inglorious Treksperts, every Thursday, wherever you listen to podcasts. We're going to be doing something. A lot of people have been asking about the holiday special. Where you're wondering where the holiday specials are. We're trying something really new this year. We're going to be doing an epic live holiday special rather than doing our 19-part holiday series. If it doesn't work out well, we may go back next year the way we did it in the past, but we are going to we'll announce when that's going to be. It'll be coming up in December. It'll be an epic live holiday special, or at least live on tape. I'm not sure yet. We're still figuring out the details, but we hope you'll join us for that. It should be pretty cool. Pretty cool.
I'm excited.
And yeah. And again, as we celebrate this Thanksgiving holiday, however you celebrate, we want to thank you on behalf of Ashley, myself, and Darren for being great listeners and great supporters of this podcast. We've met so many of you out on the road. It's been a real pleasure for Ashley and Darren. Begrudgingly, I must admit, it was a bit of a pleasure for me as well. And of course, we'll hopefully see you, whether it be at GalaxyCon Columbus, GalaxyCon Richmond, or in August at Star Trek LV 26 Trek to Vegas. But until then, you can always subscribe at TrekspertsPlus.com. You can email us or join our free Discord channel where the conversation continues daily. I guess that's really about it, other than saying Happy Thanksgiving. There are real turkeys in the oven. Real turkeys.
As God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly.
Okay, that was a Charlie X reference, and then it became a WKRP and Cincinnati reference. So that's two references for the price of one.
That's right.
That's what you get here on Trekspert.
That's right. We're a little eclectic.
Anyway, so on behalf of Ashley and myself, keep on trekking, ingloriously, of course. Can't do it. We need Darren. Nope, Darren, get back from Ticonderoga because we need the sound effects guy. We need our Foley. Okay, we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot. It's been a